In the world of WWE, giants are often seen as first-class tickets straight to the main event spotlight. If you're tall, jacked, and look intimidating just by walking out, the crowd is supposed to take notice. But not every big man becomes a legend like Andre the Giant or The Undertaker. Some of them were handed almost everything: the look, the opportunities, even spots standing next to top stars, yet still slid down the card and turned their careers into a head-scratching string of failures. Today, we're looking back at those huge, but somehow still a flop names in WWE. Let's get started right now. Wrestling Sphere, go. Number 12. Mason Ryan. If you watched WWE in the early 2010s and suddenly blurted out, "Wait, is that a young Batista?" chances are you were looking at Mason Ryan. The Welsh powerhouse looked so much like The Animal that he felt like a created character in a video game. Thick muscles, wide shoulders, intense stare, everything about him screamed, future main eventer. Coming from a bodybuilding background, Ryan was signed by WWE and sent to FCW to polish his skills, before being called up to the main roster as the muscle of the new Nexus under CM Punk. Visually, he was perfect for the silent enforcer role, standing in the back with his arms folded, then occasionally charging in to smash someone clean out of the frame. The problem was that, apart from his physique, everything else still felt under construction. In the ring, Ryan was still very green. His movement looked stiff, his footwork was heavy, and he struggled to keep pace in longer matches. On the microphone, WWE barely let him speak, so the crowd never got a chance to connect with him as anything more than that Batista lookalike. After New Nexus fell apart, Mason was given a few singles matches and some random tag outings, but nothing that could truly elevate him to even solid mid-card status, let alone the top. Eventually, he ended up in that familiar no-man's land, too big and powerful to be treated as a regular jobber, but not complete enough for WWE to gamble on long-term. His contract was quietly terminated, and Mason Ryan left the company with barely a ripple. Ironically, he went on to build a decent name for himself outside of wrestling, appearing in strength shows and even superhuman circus-style entertainment acts. A true giant in every sense, but one who never found a role worthy of his presence under WWE's bright lights. Number 11. Nathan Jones. All Vince McMahon needed was one look at this Australian monster to start picturing a future WrestleMania headliner. Nathan Jones had one of those unreal physiques, the kind you usually only see in comic books or video games, not walking around in real life. On top of that, his real-life backstory read like something WWE's writers would have come up with themselves. The Colossus of Bago Road had spent time in an Australian prison for armed robbery, then walked out of that life, threw himself into training, and became a powerlifting champion. After a brief stint in MMA, Jones switched to pro wrestling, working independent shows and competing in Japan before finally catching WWE's eye and earning a contract. The original character pitch, a deranged criminal in the vein of Hannibal Lecter, was quickly dropped. Instead, he was paired with The Undertaker, cast as the tall, silent heavy standing behind the dead man on TV. The problem was how fast everything moved. Before he'd really had time to gain proper in-ring experience, Jones was being shoved into high-profile positions. Things got so shaky that WWE actually pulled him from a tag match at WrestleMania 19 that had already been advertised, reducing him to a brief run-in at the end of the show before sending him down to OVW for more training. A few months later, the Giant came back as a heel, aligned with Paul Heyman and a crew of freak athlete monsters like Big Show, A-Train, Matt Morgan, and Brock Lesnar. On paper, it was the perfect environment for him to explode. In reality, nothing had the chance to truly take off. In the middle of a tour in his home country, Nathan Jones asked to leave the company. The brutal travel schedule, combined with the mental strain of WWE's cutthroat backstage politics, pushed him to walk away. Just like that, he became one of WWE's most frustrating, what could have been, projects. Number 10. Matt Morgan. Nathan Jones's short-lived partner, Matt Morgan, was the prototype of a mid-2000s WWE muscle giant. The kind of guy who looked like he'd been built straight off the company's superstar assembly line. Tall, ridiculously well-built, and with a camera-friendly face, Morgan seemed tailor-made for a future main event push. Fans first saw him during the second season of Tough Enough, but he had to bow out early due to injury. Even so, his size and presence were more than enough for WWE to sign him and send him to OVW. There, Morgan quickly became one of Booker Jim Cornette's favorites, constantly getting spotlighted and positioned as a big deal. The Blueprint was eventually called up to SmackDown, joining the brand's ongoing experiment of stacking the roster with towering heavyweights. For a brief moment, he hovered near the orbit of the main event scene, before being shipped back to Kentucky with a familiar explanation that he needed more seasoning. Morgan dug in for over a year, sharpening his skills and waiting for that second shot. When the call finally came, it was in the worst possible form. Upon returning to the main roster, creative saddled him with a stuttering bodyguard gimmick for Carlito, a character that was difficult to pull off and did absolutely nothing to highlight what made a giant like him special. Even being allowed to use the F5 as his finisher couldn't save things. Morgan never got a compelling storyline or a true identity of his own. Once Carlito was drafted to Raw, his role instantly became redundant. Not long after, Matt Morgan was released, bringing an end to a painfully wasted chapter in WWE. He never came back, instead carving out a far stronger career in TNA, where he became a reliable headliner and repeatedly came close to the world title, something he arguably should have had a real shot at achieving in WWE. Number 9. Giant Silva. With a body that looked like it broke the normal human template, Giant Silva in his native Brazil could pretty much do any high-altitude job you can think of, reaching items on shelves nobody else could touch, or casually lifting both a child and the cat stuck up in a tree back down to safety. But instead of working at a supermarket or becoming an animal rescue hero, he chose the basketball court, and played well enough to make Brazil's national team at the 1988 Summer Olympics in Seoul, an achievement not many giants in wrestling can claim. After that, Silva switched lanes to pro wrestling and signed with WWE in 1997. He hit TV in the spring of 1998 as a member of the Oddities, a truly offbeat group where bizarre characters were free to dance around and cause chaos outside the ring. Because he was so inexperienced between the ropes, Silva mostly served as a visual spectacle, rarely being trusted with long matches. Even so, WWE did try to give him a shot. The Brazilian giant worked an 8-man tag at SummerSlam, then later demolished Kai and Tai in a strange but surprisingly fun handicap match. On commentary, Jim Ross even compared him to Andre the Giant, a small detail that showed the company once dreamed of molding him into a new generation colossus. But everything changed quickly when WWE suddenly stole Paul White from WCW in February 1999. Once Big Show arrived, the role of top company giant was effectively taken. Silva was shipped off to Mexico in a talent exchange deal with CMLL and, not long after, was quietly released from his contract. Thankfully for him, the door that closed in WWE opened others elsewhere. In Mexico and throughout the Far East, Giant Silva found a much better fit, working wrestling shows and even stepping into MMA bouts. He became living proof of one simple truth: failing in WWE doesn't mean your career is over. Number 8. Kurgan. Giant Silva's Oddities teammate, Kurgan, actually wasn't nearly as hopeless as people like to joke. With better handling, he could have accomplished a lot more in WWE. By the time he joined the company in 1997, Kurgan was no rookie. WWE had already given him a tryout way back in 1991, and he'd spent years traveling the world, wrestling everywhere from Mexico to Japan. At one point he stepped away from the ring and worked as a bouncer at a local bar, but the passion never really died. Eventually, Kurgan decided to give wrestling another serious shot, going straight to Bret Hart's house so the Hitman could personally help him sharpen his skills and regain his feel for the ring. His first WWE character was a South African mercenary named the Interrogator in the Truth Commission. The group initially got some real attention, but interest cooled off quickly, the storylines lost steam, and Kurgan never got the chance to fully show what he could do. The turning point came in a very down-to-earth way. After WrestleMania 14, at a post-show party, Vince McMahon saw Kurgan dancing his heart out and immediately fell in love with the image of this tall, goofy giant having the time of his life. From then on, Kurgan was slotted into the Oddities, a band of lovable weirdos who were wildly popular during one of WWE's hottest eras. With his towering frame, distinctive face, and wild, over-the-top dancing, Kurgan quickly became a genuine fan favorite. Unfortunately, the Oddities had a very short shelf life. Once the group was phased out, Kurgan's name faded from TV as well, and he was soon released. Rumors kept popping up that he might return to the ring one day, but it never happened. Instead of chasing one more run in wrestling, Kurgan hung up his gigantic boots and pivoted to acting. Today, he's a familiar face in Hollywood, popping up in big-budget films in small but memorable roles. Sure, it may not be as epic as dancing next to Insane Clown Posse and John Tenta in a Cartman t-shirt, but as long as the bills get paid every month, that's not a bad ending at all. Number 7. Gene Snitsky. Why didn't Gene Snitsky ever make it to the top of WWE? Honestly, even now it's hard to give a complete answer. But one thing is absolutely certain. IT wasn't his fault. Starting out as a developmental prospect, Snitsky practically stumbled into a huge break when he was suddenly thrown into a storyline with Kane, one of the most controversial angles WWE ever produced. In the story, one of his attacks caused Kane to lose his balance and crash into Lita, leading to her suffering a miscarriage. Twisted, disturbing, and guaranteed to enrage viewers, but there's no denying it shot Gene Snitsky's name into the spotlight overnight. The problem was that he hit his peak moment way too early. After the feud with Kane cooled down, Snitsky slowly slid into the category of monster you call when you need to fill a spot, saddled with a creepy foot fetish gimmick that was both gross and hard to take seriously. He was shuffled into thrown-together tag teams with the likes of Tyson Tomko, Goldust, and other mid-card floaters. Without a real storyline or character depth, he just drifted in the middle of the card. Trying to save his own career, Snitsky went all in on a radical makeover. He shaved his head, shaved off his eyebrows, and dyed his teeth a nasty shade of yellow. Combined with skin covered in breakouts, reportedly due to an allergy, and not because of any performance enhancers, we'll just go ahead and believe that, Gene looked like a walking nightmare. He did get another push, first on the rebooted ECW brand, then back on Raw, with the hope that this time creative would finally pull the trigger. But WWE still never gave him that decisive leap forward. By late 2008, Gene Snitsky quietly received his release. He left on good terms, but didn't hide his frustration about how he'd been used toward the end, a very unfinished ending for a big man who absolutely could have done more. Number 6. Luther Reigns. Just look at Luther Reigns' carved from stone physique. Tall, thick, broad shoulders, muscles stacked on muscles, and when you put him in a suit he looks like a high-end bodyguard who just walked off a Hollywood movie set, and on top of that, his last name is Reigns. Even the name sounds like a future centerpiece. That's why the fact he never came close to main eventing WrestleMania as WWE champion still feels like a giant question mark. A graduate of the WCW power plant, Luther wrestled under the name Horseshoe before leaving WCW, working the indies all over the world, and eventually earning a WWE developmental deal in 2003. By April 2004, he was on TV as the powerhouse enforcer and right-hand man for general manager Kurt Angle. His first major televised match came on the infamous Great American Bash pay-per-view, where he beat Charlie Haas. At that point, Luther was still very green. His movement was stiff and his offense wasn't exactly smooth, but under the guidance of an Olympic gold medalist like Angle, he improved noticeably, especially in tag team situations. Beyond teaming with Angle, Reigns was paired with Mark Jindrak, another young blue-chip prospect with a standout look. Together, they were logical foils for veterans like Rey Mysterio, Rob Van Dam, Big Show, and Eddie Guerrero, forcing the duo to learn fast while sharing the ring with top-tier talent. The biggest exam of Luther Reigns' career came in the form of a singles match with The Undertaker at No Way Out 2005. Unfortunately, his performance that night didn't quite seal the deal. From that moment on, he started slipping down the card, eventually being relegated to velocity-only appearances and almost vanishing from the bigger shows. When creative disagreements with Paul Heyman over his character's direction surfaced, Luther chose to negotiate his release and slowly stepped away from wrestling altogether. He left behind the lingering sense that WWE had a champion blueprint on paper that never actually got finished. Number 5. Big Cass. Big Cass stands over 7 feet tall, and yes, that is exactly the kind of thing you can't teach. But you absolutely can teach someone how to feel the rhythm of a match, how to guide a crowd's emotions, how to sell an attack convincingly, and how to hold a microphone so people shut up and listen, all the tools that turn a big guy into a real star. Cass, with a look that screamed modern-day test, hit the jackpot when he was paired up with Enzo Amore. This odd couple, one short, one towering, ran wild in NXT and essentially paved their own road to the main roster. The mix of Enzo's explosive personality, catchphrases that begged to be printed on t-shirts, and a tag formula they had down to a science made them the perfect opening act. When they came out, the crowd stood up. When they left, the energy stayed for the rest of the night. Watching them, It was easy to believe they'd anchor the division for years. Of course, WWE couldn't resist seeing a potential singles ace in a near 7-footer, so they pulled the trigger on a split before either man was truly ready to stand alone. Cass was pushed into storylines with Big Show and Daniel Bryan and got plenty of TV time and spotlight. Sadly, things went off the rails behind the curtain. Erratic behavior, reportedly tied to substance issues, led to Cass being released from the company. It was a brutal fall, but not the end of the story. He started putting his life back together, tightening up his physique to a level that would probably make Vince McMahon, if he were still running things, take a second look. In his early to mid-30s, Big Cass still has a long road ahead of him. And honestly, a lot of us are hoping that one day he gets another shot to walk back onto a truly big stage. Number 4. Tyson Tomko. Debuting on TV around the same time as Luther Reigns and slotted into a similar role, Tyson Tomko came with a full Ruthless Aggression starter kit, rock-solid build, menacing beard, tattoos all over, and the kind of presence that screams, "This is not the guy you want to mess with at a bar." WWE introduced Tomko as the problem solver for Christian and Trish Stratus, essentially a massive hired gun paid to rough up their enemies. The formula was simple. Tomko walked out in a tank top, glared over Christian's shoulder, and every so often stormed in to dish out some brutal power moves. On paper it sounds basic, but it was exactly the kind of role he played extremely well. The Christian, Tomko, Trish trio ran like a well-oiled machine. When Stratus started easing out of the picture, her absence was covered by more tag action, giving Tomko extra ring time alongside Captain Charisma. Fans began to recognize the big man who looked like he'd stepped straight off a Ruthless Aggression poster. Trouble started when Christian was drafted to SmackDown in 2005 and Tomko stayed on Raw, forced to go solo. WWE tried to mold him into a standard monster heel. One week he'd squash a jobber, the next week he'd crush a lower card name with a nasty big boot. But it quickly became obvious this was just a warm-up routine so they could feed him to John Cena 2 weeks in a row, a loud and clear sign the company had zero long-term plans for Tyson Tomko. From there, he was lumped together with Gene Snitsky, working low-profile matches on Heat and house shows, rarely getting a whiff of real TV exposure. Not satisfied with just showing up for the paycheck, Tomko asked for his release and got it in April 2006. He went on to perform very well in Japan and TNA, well enough that WWE actually brought him back a few years later. But even that return ended in limbo. His contract was terminated after only a few months, before Tyson Tomko could properly make it back onto WWE television. In the end, he was a big man who always seemed to be standing right at the doorway of something bigger, but never actually got to walk through. Number 3. Bam Neely. Oh great, it's Bam Neely time again. Honestly, I already dedicated an entire video just to this guy, and yet here we are bringing him up once more. We're dealing with someone who almost has nothing worth digging into. No standout gimmick, no special skills, just a big bald dude named Bam. That's it. Pretty much Neely's whole accomplishment in WWE revolves around being friends with Chavo Guerrero. Thanks to that connection, he got pulled into La Familia, sharing screen time with Edge and Vicky Guerrero on SmackDown in 2008. Sounds big on paper, but in reality he looked more like a lucky security guard who accidentally wandered into a royal family portrait. I'm fairly sure Neely had a few actual matches, but honestly, I don't care enough to go back and dig through the footage. We're talking about Bam Neely here, not The Rock or Kurt Angle. His only real asset was his size, and even that never felt properly used, because he didn't come across as threatening or cool in any way. Sometimes I genuinely wonder if he ever went through proper wrestling training at all, or if one night Chavito got drunk, saw a bouncer outside a nightclub who looked good enough, and just slapped him on the shoulder like, "Hey, wanna be on TV with me tomorrow?" To be totally honest, that's the most logical explanation I can think of, because it's hard to picture WWE management sitting there, watching tape and screaming, "We need to get Bam Neely on TV right now." With most of the giants on this list, you can blame bad luck, bad booking, or rough timing. But with Bam Neely, the only real reason he failed is painfully simple, because he was Bam Neely. Number 2. Jackson Andrews. Blink and you'll miss it is usually used for quick moments, not for a guy who's over 7 feet tall. Yet Jackson Andrews' WWE run was so short that many fans never even had time to register his name, and if they did, they've probably forgotten it by now. Under his real name, Stephen Slocum, he was a solid basketball player, good enough to play professionally in Europe after college. When that hardwood adventure came to an end, Slocum headed back to the United States and decided to roll the dice in pro wrestling, a world that's always hungry for big men who can move. After only a few years of training, WWE quickly scooped him up in 2009 and sent him to Florida Championship Wrestling. In the Sunshine State, he started getting reshaped and refined into Jackson Andrews, a name that already sounded tall, cold, and intimidating. Roughly a year later, opportunity knocked earlier than expected. Andrews was called up to the main roster as Tyson Kidd's bodyguard. On paper, it was a fantastic pairing, a towering, emotionless enforcer protecting a cocky, undersized technician, a formula clearly echoing Diesel and Shawn Michaels back in the day. Andrews attacked David Hart Smith, Kidd's former partner in the Hart Dynasty, then got flattened by Mark Henry's World's Strongest Slam not long after. And that was almost the entire WWE story of Jackson Andrews. The familiar conclusion popped up again. Jackson Andrews wasn't ready, he needed more time to develop. The problem is, that time never came. He was quietly released, left the company with no fanfare, and vanished from the wrestling map altogether. You were a big guy, Jackson, no doubt about it. But to become a true, big sexy in your own right, you were still a long, long way off. Number 1. Ezekiel Jackson. Ezekiel Jackson is the textbook example of a wrestler you look at and immediately think, this guy was born to dominate. His frame was as thick as a brick wall, biceps like utility poles, and a face that always looked like he was ready to snap anyone in half who dared step in the ring with him. Judging by appearance alone, you'd assume he was a former world champion, not a name that quietly faded into the background. Big Zeke first turned heads as the Brian Kendrick's bodyguard on SmackDown, before being moved to ECW, where he actually became the brand's final ECW champion before the show was shut down. On the surface, that sounds impressive, but the belt didn't leave much of a legacy because ECW itself was on life support by that point. After that, Ezekiel Jackson joined the Core alongside Wade Barrett, Justin Gabriel, and Heath Slater, a stable that looked like it might be Nexus 2.0, but quickly lost direction. Zeke was pushed as the group's muscle, even holding the Intercontinental Championship at one stage. However, his matches were often criticized for lacking depth, built mostly around a handful of basic power moves that rarely produced truly memorable moments. In an era where fans increasingly gravitated toward agile wrestlers with diverse arsenals, Ezekiel was stuck with a style that felt too one-dimensional. When injuries started piling up and WWE's interest in him dipped at the same time, Jackson slowly disappeared from major shows and eventually left the company without much noise. With many other giants, you can still argue they didn't get enough chances or were sunk by bad creative. With Ezekiel Jackson, the general feeling is that WWE did try. He just never managed to break past the looks impressive, but bland in the ring, sealing to become the kind of star the audience had no choice but to remember. Which giant on this epic flop list stood out to you the most? Drop your thoughts in the comments, hit like, subscribe to Wrestling Sphere, and ring the notification bell so you don't miss any of our other wild behind-the-scenes WWE stories.